Good evening. Today is Tuesday, January 24th, 2012. Today is a regular meeting of the Board of Education. Members present, Mr. Convertito, Mr. Liu, Mrs. Gerber, Ms. Iacono, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Fattibene, Mr. Carey, and Mrs. Brand. I expect Mrs. Kennelly shortly. Will you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Our first item of business is approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of January 10th, 2012. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the regular meeting of January 10th, 2012. Moved by Mrs. Brand, seconded by Mr. Carey. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Minutes pass unanimously. Our next item on the agenda is Student Committee Liaison Reports. Ms. Teixeira, I apologize.
For academics, today was the last day of midterms, and tomorrow is the last day of the semester, and it's also review days. For athletics, the Fairfield Ward versus Ludlow basketball game is tonight, and the boys wrestling team placed first out of 14 other schools at the Ward Invitationals on January 7th. For extracurricular, the Ward debate team won the recent Connecticut debate tournament at Ward on January 7th, and we competed against 17 other schools. There was a total of 208 debaters, and we placed first. Two of our debaters placed first. And auditions for the spring musical and the Interact talent show are being held this week and next week.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I wanted to make a motion to waive the remainder of the reading of the remainder of the board reports.
Is there a second? Mr. Carey, any discussion? All in favor? Passes unanimously. Okay. Our next item is the superintendent's report.
Oh, in the spirit, I'll agree to pass.
Thank you. Our next item of business is old business. We have the approval of the understanding on health insurance. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the understanding on health insurance. Moved by Mr. Carey, seconded by Mrs. Gerber. This evening I'm going to open up before we get to board discussion. We have two special guests with us this evening. First Selectman Michael Tetreau and the Chairman of the Board of Finance, Tom Flynn. They are here to speak to us. As you know, this is a mutual understanding agreement, so we thought it would be important to hear from them on this particular issue. Dr. Title, do you have anything you want to add before I turn the mic over to the first Selectman?
No.
Okay. Mr. Tetreau and Mr. Flynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you. We flipped the coin, and I got to go first, much like the Giants will be receiving on the Super Bowl. No, wait a minute. We are trying to work out a suitable wager. It turns out that somehow this was skipped in the interview process, that Dr. Title's actually a New England Patriots fan.
I know. That was my fault.
And not the only one.
I would have vetoed that.
I think we could have a central office versus town hall friendly wager.
About $150 million or so.
That would be 149.
Every penny counts.
The passing out two exhibits, and one, the sheet that is labeled Town of Fairfield Insurance Fund Analysis, is the one we'll step through first. All right, and there are some extra copies in case the public would like some. I did not make enough for this crowd. I normally don't get this many attendees at Board of Selectmen meetings, so.
We will post these online, so thank you.
Mr. Flynn and I thought it would be good to step through the internal service fund just to give everybody a flavor for how it works, and use that by way to illustrate what we're trying to accomplish on behalf of the town. In looking at this from the top, these These numbers are from June 30th. See at the top, it's from a period actuals from July 1, 2010 to June 30th, 2011. So these are the actual results for last fiscal year. Our internal service fund is a way we kind of handle our self-insurance. We basically build up reserves in each account. We budget for what we think we're going to spend in each year, and then we adjust that number the following year based on whether we're up or down within that. For most of these, we're taking recommendations in the insurance areas from Aon and the workers' comp areas from PMA, that's our workers' comp company. When you look at these, we break them out into three areas. One is risk management, which includes things like workers' comp, general liability, town property claims, claims handling service, medical access fees, medical and dental claims, prescription, the last of the insurance there. You can see we break it out then also in town medical and Board of Ed medical. We basically are self-insured, so we're paying the actual claims. There's not a premium per se. The closest thing to a premium is what we estimate our annual expenses should be as part of our budget, and that's what we put in each year. When you look at this, I'm going to drop you down to the fund balance line, kind of cut to the bottom line, if you will. 3 lines up from the bottom is the fund balances, 6/30/11 on an accrual basis. A lot of the discussion that this board has had, a lot of the questions that I've gotten from this board have centered around the 2 insurance funds. In fact, the reserve encompasses the 2 insurance funds and the risk management fund. When the rating agencies look at this report, or the fund balances, they're looking at all 3. They don't care which fund balance, in essence, is plus or minus. They're looking at the net of all 3. We received, this is all about, in one sense, our credit rating, which is currently a AAA credit rating with a negative outlook from Moody's. S&P said it has given us a AAA. Fitch has given us a AAA. Moody's has given us a AAA with a negative outlook. They did that a couple years ago. And at the time, they specifically pointed to this fund and said the reserves are not high enough. Since then, our workers' comp number's gone more negative. The town has actually recovered a bit from where we were, and the Board of Ed reserve has actually come down. However, the number that matters is over in the far right side in the 4th column, which is the totals for all this. And that's the $4.7 million number, $4,738,115. That's really the number that Moody's is looking at. That's the number we don't want to see change. Except actually we'd like to get more positive. Let me rephrase that. We don't want to see it get any more negative. If you look across that line, look to the left, you can see the Board of Ed, as of June 30th, had a $3 million positive balance in the reserve fund. The town, as of June 30th, was about $250,000 to the negative. But the risk management fund, driven in major part by the workers' comp number, is $7.6 million to the negative. That's the challenge. That's what we're trying to address. The Board of Finance identified this issue 2 or 3 years back. 4 or 5 years ago, the Board of Finance made a commitment to fully fund the town insurance balance on this. So the town has been funding their balance as recommended by Aon, much like the Board of Ed has over the past few years. This has made a difference in the town number, and the town his reserve has changed dramatically over the last few years. However, the workers' comp number, by virtue of the claims that we've experienced, and specifically the claims in the last 2 or 3 years, has driven this number in the overall balance more negative. The workers' comp fund is made up of claims by Board of Ed employees and town employees, but the expenses have been totally funded out of the town side budget. So when you look at what we're trying to do, as much as the Board of Finance identified this issue a few years ago, and I'm going to say we at the moment because at the time I was serving with Mr. Flynn on the Board of Finance, we didn't address that because with the economy dropping off the way it did, we were under tremendous pressure to keep the tax increases at a reasonable level. And what you've seen over the last 3 years, we had a 1.9, 1.6, and then approximately a 4% tax increase last year. Right. I'm not used to having a musical accompaniment either, but I do appreciate it. What all that boils down to is we're trying to manage the balance sheet. The balance sheet is something that affects all of us, potentially impacts our credit rating. And if it impacts our credit rating, that means we pay higher insurance, higher interest, our debt service goes up, and specifically the school projects we're trying to fund cost more. So it's in all of our best interest to help work together to help manage this. Now, that process of working together started with meetings with Dr. Title, Mr. Flynn, Mr. Hiller, and myself this summer. There was an initial proposal back to this board of what we'd like to do with it. There were a host of questions that have been raised, and we came here tonight to both step through the process and also hopefully address those questions. The proposal, in order to provide the maximum flexibility to the Board of Ed and not get involved in micromanaging your budget or suggesting how you handle it, is to say let's focus just on the balance sheet account. Let's focus just on the reserve number that's currently in the Board of Ed fund, and let's just not lower that. Let's just leave that where it is. Give us time to address the other negatives. All right. The town has experienced some recently good, some very good insurance experience recently. If you look at this report and go to the top, you can see that the top line is on the left is labeled fund balance 7110. That's going back about 18 months. If you go over to the middle column, town medical, that's at 1.5 million to the negative. If you go down the left-hand column to fund balance 63011, again read across to the town medical line, you can see the town is now $250,000 to the negative. The town experienced $1.3 million worth of positive experience last year that helped address the deficit in this reserve fund. Right. That's a big deal on the town side. The Board of Ed has experienced similar results the last, I'm going to say 3 years that I'm aware of. It may even be a little bit more than that. So that's led to a very positive experience on the Board of Ed side. Both the town and Board of Ed together are hoping we don't have any negative experiences because we might have to make some of that up. But for right now, it's been a very positive experience. You made some adjustments last year. And you can read down the Board of Ed side and see the impact from last year. You can see that you started the year at $3.2 million and change on the positive side. When you add up the revenue, net out the revenues and expenses for last year, you can see that you're still at, or down just a little bit at 3.1 on the positive side. However, we started the year at workers' comp at 7.6 million in the negative, and we finished the year on workers' comp at $7.6 million in negative. So the issue driving this is the workers' comp number. If we could magically win the lottery and fix one of these numbers, the number we'd fix is the workers' comp number. One of the questions has been, okay, well, so how long is it going to take to fix that? The last 2 or 3 years, with the pressure put on to minimize taxes, we consciously decided not to address it, to fund everything normally. We don't want it any worse. In the words Mr. Flynn reminds us from time to time, thou shalt do no harm. Don't make it any worse. But we didn't feel we had the financial resources to address that. How big a deal is that? Roughly $7 million is about a 3% tax increase. So we could address that next year if on top of everything else we're doing, we just increase taxes another 3% to address that one line. Taking that hit all in 1 year is a bit problematic and probably more traumatic to our taxpayers than what we'd like to do. We know we need to address that if we're going to lose the negative outlook. So part of the issue is to start putting some additional funding into that and spread that up. But even if we put $1 million in a year, we're still 7 years away from getting that back to zero. That's our challenge. There is a different second chart that was handed out just to kind of break this out to give you a flavor of what's taking place here. It's broken into two tables. One is unemployment compensation, one is workers' compensation. Let's just take the workers' comp numbers for the last 3 years, fiscal 09, 10, and 11. And all this does is break out what our workers' comp expense has been for the last 3 years by the Board of Ed component and the town component. And you can see that in 09 it was $629,000 for the Board of Ed, $597 for the town. In fiscal 10, $765 for the Board of Ed, $1 million for the town. And in fiscal 11, $1,250,000 for the Board of Ed and $855 for the town. So when we talk about this being a shared responsibility, when we talk about this being a joint obligation, it truly is, both financially. All right. And again, I do want to compliment Central Office. We met today with the representative from the Workers' Comp Company. We stepped through these numbers with him. We looked at what the projections were for this year. We also got a whole analysis on what drives this, what types of claims drives this, how is it broken out between the Board of Ed and the town. And together we're looking at putting in an action plan to make sure we're doing everything possible we can to manage this expense and make sure that we stop it and get this under control and bring our annual expense down so we're not paying as much per year. The number that the town put in 2 years ago was $1.5 million. The number that the town put in last year was $2.1 million. The number that the town is currently considering budgeting to put in this year is $2.65 million. That's almost a doubling of this expense item on an annual basis. That's way too much growth. So we want to make sure we're doing everything we can on an operational basis to keep that number under control. And while we're doing that, we're just asking for the Board of Ed cooperation and central office in terms of keeping that reserve number where it is and not drawing that down anymore. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you summed it up well. Any questions from board members?
Address the unemployment piece on this.
It's not within these numbers, but
Yeah, well, it's right there.
oh,
on the
it's
table.
right here, but it's not within the insurance reserve.
The unemployment piece is just, it's another, there's several expense items that the town basically funds, even though it's an expense that's incurred by the Board of Ed, and this is more custom and tradition than I think any great rationale for doing it that way. The unemployment compensation was just part of the table that came out of this analysis, but again, if you go back over the last 3 years, unemployment for the Board of Ed was $48,000, and for the town was $71,000. In fiscal 10, $75,000 for the Board of Ed, $123,000 for the town. And last year, fiscal 11, $108,000 for the Board of Ed and $99,000 for the town.
And as the first selectman points out, I think it's fair to note, both the unemployment compensation as well as the workers' comp, are not included within the budget that you're speaking of. Those are both budgeted for and paid for out of the town side, even though roughly half, and in certain years more than half, of the expenditures out of both those funds are due to Board of Education operations.
If you, again, go back to the insurance fund analysis sheet, you can also see that general liability claims is also something that's funded on the town side, but if somebody slips and falls on a playground or gets hurt in class, that's also something that would be reserved for and funded on the town side of that. And again, that's our custom of how we've just traditionally done that.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board for the first selectman and the chairman of the Board of Finance? Mr. Convertito.
I have one, and it's a fairly simple one, I think, being the rookie that I am.
We'll try and make it a complicated answer to make up for that.
Well, okay. If Aon is recommending a 1.25% accrual, okay, which I guess is the IBNR, and we're funding that at 200%, wouldn't it be more prudent from the town side simply to take that 0.75% and put it on your side? That additional 0.75%, I've heard estimates anywhere, it's from 1.2 to 1.4 million dollars.
It's
Why wouldn't it just be a transfer from one side to the other? And that way it's, as long as we're at 1.25%.
What do you mean by transfer, Mr. Convertito?
If the Board of Ed budget were reduced by that and the town side was increased by that, isn't that the same net effect?
Yes, but do you want to pay the town side for the workers' comp? Because they're already picking up $1.2 million of the workers' comp expense. You see what I'm saying? You're just increasing the town side expense and not increasing the Board of Ed expense on that side. If you do that, the town then would take a look and say, okay, well, from the Board of Ed side, give us the $1.2 million out of the workers' comp side that we're funding on your behalf. The net effect gets you to the same place.
I think you're taking it from the expense side, I'm taking it from, if our
Well, that's why
budget, if our budget request went down by 1.2 million.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. If yeah, you're right. If what I'm saying is, that's why I asked the question whether you're talking a transfer or budgetary. If you're talking budgetary, then you're talking P&L. If you're talking transfer, taking that money and just moving it and having no effect on the operating budget, I think you would have problems there with the unions and things of that sort, because you want to keep those funds over to the side. You want to specifically identify who put in what. But when the rating agencies look at it, they look at it on an aggregated basis. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I told you it would be a simple answer.
Yeah, I think the issue is, and it's been asked and not asked, I guess, in some of the meetings we've been at. The goal here is not to remove any of the money
Right.
from the Board of Ed reserve. All right. All we're asking you to do is just leave it there for now. At some point in the future, you can draw that down if you choose. All right. But we're not, there's no initiative here to remove any of that money out of Board of Ed control. So that whatever obligations you choose to fund with that, you can do that. All we're asking is that in the short term, or until we mutually agree, is that we keep that number where it is, so that while we're addressing these other issues, we don't create any more perfect storm numbers in drawing that down. As we might have a few years ago, or a couple years ago, if we didn't have, we've had some really great experience on the insurance side, on the Board of Ed side, and that's covered kind of a host of sins here. But if we look at a perfect storm from 2 years ago, that we avoided, by the way, we were reviewing the workers' comp claims with Margaret Mary this afternoon, and you can see 2 years ago there's a huge hit on workers' comp. That was the same time the Board of Ed in June reduced the funding for the insurance line and drew down the reserve on the Board of Ed side. All right? So we see a $2 million kind of negative bump or cost increase on workers' comp, we see a $2 million drop. That's a $4 million swing in an account we're already in trouble on. Now, fortunately, the Board of Ed had great experience that year, so it covered the drawdown, but the workers' comp negative piece still hit. So we dodged part of a bullet on that. So that when we're working in, again, these balance sheets are accounts that impact both of us. It's not, as Tom mentioned, the P&L or the expense items that you deal with. It's not just the P&L or expense items on the town side. It's not like managing overtime. You can manage your overtime. The town can manage its overtime. Here, we literally have our future tied together on this, and we just want to make sure that we move these in concert.
Mr. Liu?
So why do we need an MOU?
Two years ago, let's take a step back. About 4 years ago, it came to our attention on the Board of Finance that there was a problem with this account. Okay? That problem was made up of the risk management side of the house. It was also made up out of some underfunding on the town side of the house from many years back. We corrected that underfunding on the town side of the house 3 years ago, and steadily that reserve has been increasing. At the same time, as Mike mentioned, the first selectman mentioned, we had some bad experience on the workers' comp side, which lowered that balance. And that workers' comp experience, as we just showed over past several years, is both on the town side and the Board of Ed side. So it's a problem together. Okay. What happened? Okay, and I think it happened because there was not enough communication, not because there was any malice intended. We passed the budget 2 years ago to put in place to address the overall fund balance here, to increase it to the best of our abilities. The Board of Ed's budget was cut during those budget deliberations as it passed through the Board of Finance and the RTM. When the Board of Education, after the budget process was put in place, was completed, they turned around, the Board of Ed at the time, turned around and reduced the funding into their medical accounts, okay, based on what they believed was better information. What that had the impact of doing, because it was a balance sheet, was lowering that balance, or potentially lowering that balance. As Mike said, we somewhat avoided the perfect storm of having a bad year on the workers' comp side, as well as having a bad year on the experience side, and dramatically lowering that balance. But if that had happened, okay, very little doubt we would have had more pressure on our AAA credit rating. So what the MOU attempts to do is say, hey, here's the rules of the road as we address this issue. Here's the rules of the road as we live in concert with one another within this account, and we address the issue we collectively have on this workers' comp issue over the next umpty-ump years. Now, if that isn't in place, and the town boards go ahead and pass that budget this year, or next year, or the year after, and for some reason the Board of Ed decides to dip back into that insurance fund, it could cause dramatic problems for the entire town.
Thank you. That answers part of my question. I guess my only concern is, and I'm hypothesizing here, but doesn't it only make sense that that MOU sort of protects the town, but not necessarily does so well for the Board of Ed, given that we put up the MOU first, we go through all the budget processes, we get cut, and maybe we say, just like you said happened before, not that I think it should be done in a retaliatory style, but we should say, wow, maybe we need to revisit how we look at our budgets. Maybe it's better to have, and I'm not sure if I even agree with an MOU, but if we were to have an agreement, maybe it should come after all of the budgeting system is done so that everyone gets a fair shake.
We would have already voted by that point, and we're not going to take that risk again, that could happen, because it's puts at jeopardy too much with the AAA credit rating. And remember, okay, your assumption is, and I'll go back to my answer to Mr. Convertito, which was a good question, okay, the town is already covering the Board of Education on the workers' comp side and the unemployment side. So it's not like the town is looking for a free lunch here. It's not like the town isn't putting up its fair share. They are putting up its fair share, and over the last several years, more when it comes to the unemployment and the workers' comp side of the house. This is just how do we collectively work together, and the memo of understanding is just basically saying, these are the rules of engagement over the next few years as we address this issue with the balance. That's all.
Mrs. Brand?
Thank you both. I don't think anyone has seen this and not thought that there's concern. I mean, serious concern. One of my questions is, if I may, and I do have two, if that's all right.
Sure.
Is how long have we run the town with the town side assuming the responsibility, the financial responsibility of the workman's comp as well as the unemployment?
Mr. Hiller might be here. I know it's for as long as I've been on the Board of Finance, which is, this is my 7th budget cycle, so I know it's been that long.
Seems longer than that.
I had brown hair at that time. Now,
So did I.
I think the easy answer on that is 1639, the day the town was founded.
Mr. Hiller was still CFO at that point.
Mr. Ludlow set it up.
Oh, thanks. I think my next question is a follow-up to Mr. Convertito. I'm not sure I quite understand what the difference would be. I like to do things kind of simply. And to me, simple is, if you need cash, then we can decrease our funding request, and we can assume 125%, and everything's clean, simple, and you have your cash, and we're meeting our responsibility on our end. So I'm not quite sure I understand why we wouldn't decrease our funding request based on the 1.2 or 1.4 to help you folks. What we're looking at from here, to me, seems awful lot of convoluted to get to the same place. So I don't know what the difference is with these two different options. To me, I would decrease our funding request, and then the town could then request it because it still comes with the total end that it's the same, and that should help you with some flexibility. Because honestly, on this side, if it's sitting here in this account, there's very little flexibility for you.
I think that could solve a host of our problems. The workers' comp number's 7 million negative. Half of that's yours. You're going to give us 3.5?
Well, actually, we were never talking about the reserve that we're keeping in is only balancing out for about 1.4 at the most, over the 125 anyway, and we can't go below that. So it's only that differential that we're talking about. And that's it. So if we're down to 1.5, I appreciate it. I do. Please. I do. Because like everybody else, I'll be paying for it if this doesn't work out. But I want to know, is it possible? Either way, we're not going to make out a whole lot of money. You're not, we're not.
I'm not sure I quite understand.
Well, I don't know why we
Question
can't
and
just,
proposal.
I don't understand what's the advantage to the MOU versus just simply reducing our funding request by the same amount, 1.4, 1.2, whatever the difference is. And last I looked, I think it was 1.4.
Okay, you reduce your funding request. What? Help me out here. I'm not quite sure I understand what you're doing.
We don't actually have to fund
Right.
our account higher at 200%. We can only fund it at, we can and do fine at 125%. That was the actuarial's
Okay,
recommendation.
That's the reserve number.
Right.
Okay, that's not the 24 million that the account takes to fund, or the 15 or 16 million that you put in each year as an expense line item.
So you're, I guess I'm still confused. I apologize.
Let me approach it a different way. I think I might understand what you're saying. Here's what I would tell you. I wouldn't want to do that if I were in your shoes, because you've just gone ahead and changed your stop loss to $500,000, as I recall, right? $300,000. I don't think you have enough experience to know what's going to happen there. And, well, we've been very lucky the last couple of years with our experience rates on the medical side, thankfully. That could easily reverse course. And then next year, you could be looking at a dramatic increase on your IBNR and a dramatic increase. So the one-time, quote-unquote, pop you might get from moving that 1.4 could very well create a rather dramatic hole for you in your next year's budget. And that funding cliff that I've spoken about at several of our meetings will result in a lot of headlines for the Board of Education having a very large increase in spending
You're right.
next year. So I would much rather, if I were in your shoes, say, keep it where it is, have that there as your cushion, because all you have to do is keep it at 2 right now, and that cushions you from those future surprises, which sadly, inevitably will come. While our boards wrestle with the workers' comp issue for both our accounts. That'd be my recommendation for you.
Sure. Thank you. I guess where I'm going is the actuarials did say we were okay with 300. And as people may well know, I was the one who was reticent about the stop loss, but they did say 125, and they did say we were okay.
Yeah,
And,
actuaries
you know,
say a lot of things. I mean, great.
I know.
Actuaries have also said the pension plans are fully funded and this, that, and the other thing. Merry Christmas. Where are we now?
Yeah, but we
But
pay
could talk
for
to
it.
the state of Connecticut about what the actuaries told them about their pension plans.
Then maybe that is something we could have a separate discussion to revisit whether or not the people that we think are advising them are giving us good advice. But again, that's what we
I
pay
think our
them to
actuaries
do.
are probably giving as good advice as actuaries can give. I just don't know that I would ever bet the farm on what the actuarial advice is. I'm not a betting man like that, and I'm certainly not a betting man with taxpayer money like that. So I would counsel not to do it.
Mr. Fattibene?
Yeah, I have 2 questions. These accounts in which these funds are held, are they of a nature of an escrow or a trust fund account?
They are not in trust fund accounts. The town handles 2 trust fund accounts as far as our retiree health benefit accounts, but they are not, they're segregated accounts, escrowed, but the funds are not segregated for that purpose.
They're unrestricted to the town. There's no fiduciary obligation for the beneficiaries?
Unrestricted from that definition, yes.
All right. I guess directed to the first selectman. Is it your intent in any way to control appropriated funds given to the Board of Education and their ability to fulfill their obligation as agents of the state to provide an education to the students of Fairfield?
Absolutely not. All we're asking to do is leave that fund balance where it is until we can address the issues that the workers' comp liabilities have cost us over time.
Okay.
Mr. Convertito?
Again, through the chair to the first selectman or chairman of the Board of Finance. In reference to the MOU, as far as wording goes, last paragraph. Provisions of this memorandum of intent on health insurance are terminable by either party at any time by written notice to the other, provided that such termination shall not reinstitute or reactivate the provisions of the Clark-Flato memorandum. Point 2, which I guess is the second bullet point and the third bullet point. How does this, should the Board of Ed budget get cut by $2 million, how does this memorandum stop us from taking $1.4 million out of that account? Of that line item budget? If it's terminable at any point in time, okay,
Yeah, that's not a proposal that I've agreed to or I think we've agreed to at this point.
It was in your packet, and it's in an enclosure. It's enclosure number 2.
isn't this what I just took out of here?
Yes, that's the original enclosure, Mr. Convertito, and actually, I believe there'll be a motion on the table this evening to amend that enclosure to include language that would satisfy the town end of the memorandum.
I think the short form of the process, we developed a new memorandum of understanding this summer that was presented to this board. This board made significant modifications to that. Part of the reason we're here is to explain why those don't work. But either way, whatever we agree to would have to be agreed to by all three boards. Unlike the initial memorandum of understanding, we're asking that it be a consensus agreement approved by the Board of Ed, approved by the Board of Finance, and approved by the Board of Selectmen.
Mr. Convertito, you might remember that I originally informed the board that the first selectman was supportive of the first page of the document, but the second page of the document was not something that the town was agreeable to. Any further discussion? Mr. Liu?
Again, I'm a Fairfielder. My taxes are going to go up too, and for the good of the whole, we certainly want to help whatever way we can. I think the thing that, and I really don't look to you guys to answer this question. It's something that this board has not been able to answer, which is the legality of a document like this. And I've asked leadership, and in fact, a couple of board members have asked leadership of this board to provide an attorney to get a legal opinion about this document, because based on the research that I've done, this isn't something that we can do. It violates what we can do based on what Mr. Fattibene was saying, is that we're putting money aside, not specifically for education, we're putting money aside to help taxes and for our AAA rating. And by doing so, we're in violation. Now, I have no problem with us funding our account, maybe even funding it a little higher 1 year or 2 years, or to revisit this on a yearly basis in order to help the town out, given that there's a give and take here. But to have an MOU in place, which I think binds us, which I think automatically shows a conflict of interest from the board's point, at least from this board member's point of view, I think is wrong. And I don't think we need it. And I think if we have communication, then we're not going to have a situation where we're pulling money from each other. But I think you also set up a really interesting question that you said earlier, which is, well, I won't get into that. Basically, right now, I just think that this is something that we don't need an MOU to do what you're asking us to do.
Just as a point of clarification, this has been reviewed by our attorney. Mr. Flynn, you wanted to respond?
Thank you. What did your attorney say?
He said that it was, Dr. Title, do you want to speak to what? He had the conversation with Mr. Houston. I don't want to.
Actually, there were two reviews, because there was a draft prior to this one that I had Don Houston review, was brought to the table, and at the time, the two attorneys who were on the board said they wanted a crack at it, and Paul and John actually suggested some John Mottola suggested some changes, and Don Houston looked at it again. So twice he's looked at it, and twice he has been amenable to the agreement as you see it here.
Can I just follow up on that then? You know, we tried to talk about this the last meeting, and we were shut down. We've been trying to talk about this for 2 weeks, and we've asked for legal opinions. How come we can't see that document? And why is it on the eve of the vote we suddenly hear that the attorneys are saying it's okay?
Mr. Liu, that's been stated on the record several times. If you'd like, we will produce the minutes that can state that and show that.
What I'd like is the actual document of the attorneys saying that this is okay for us to do.
That has never actually been requested, but we can provide that. Mr. Flynn, go ahead. I think you wanted to respond.
I just wanted to, if I could, through the chair, to Mr. Liu directly, what is the, I want to be sensitive to your plight, to your comments. So what is the exact conflict of interest that you are concerned about?
It basically states that whatever we do with our funds has to be directly towards education. So by your asking us in print, in an MOU, to keep a certain amount of money for taxes, for AAA ratings, in an account for a certain amount of time, has nothing to do with education. But I have no problem funding it. I have no problem funding that thing.
2 points. Is that meant to imply that doing that and exercising fiscal responsibility relative to the credit rating agency are in conflict? Because one could argue that the interest that is saved on all these school projects, of which the majority of our debt is related to, that interest is saved based on the fact that we've maintained a AAA credit rating. So I think it is entirely consistent to have fiscal responsibility as it relates to reserve accounts in delivering quality education. In addition, the amounts that are being asked to be put aside relative to the MOU in order to maintain the 2 versus the 1.25 are no more than the share of the unemployment compensation expense that the town has incurred on behalf of the employees of the Board of Education. So I think you can't look at just one side of the pie there. You have to look at both sides and say that, in fact, those funds and that expenditure is related to delivering the education and the educational program that you want.
Well,
I think that's entirely consistent.
I would say that maybe then we should have a different type of arrangement of how we pay for each other's billings in terms of that matter. But let me say this, and I have to say that I'm not very happy with the, I don't know, you said you were being sensitive to it, but I noticed, I detected it, a note of sarcasm. And that is, I don't know how long this has been going on, but for at least the last several years, this has been happening through this memorandum under the Flato administration, which should tell you a lot right there. And we have been putting a lot
That
of
was
money,
sarcasm.
a lot of money into this account, and it looks like it's the board's budget. And we have heard the town selectmen's board, the finance, the RTM say, you guys have got to lower your budgets, when we've been actually carrying a part of the town. Now, I have no problem, like I said, working together. But I don't think that's completely in the spirit of it.
Mr. Lute, may I?
Yes,
Madam Chair?
please, Mr. Flynn.
How are you carrying the town?
Maybe carrying was too bold, but definitely part of that budget was going towards this, and it should have been noted.
It was.
No.
It actually was. Yeah, it's been noted several times. And that's what the sheet represents. This sheet has been around for years now, at our request, actually. So this has been known for quite some time. This isn't, I'm sorry if it's a surprise. It's been around and we've known about it. And I was trying to be sensitive because I'm trying to understand the conflict, and what I reacted to was the sense of conflict that you seem to be having with fully funding a reserve versus delivering a quality education program. And I think that's completely consistent, particularly if those funds are absolutely set aside, as the first selectman pointed out, to go for the benefit of your employees. And let me go back for a second on the Memorandum of Understanding, because while I'll blame the prior administration for a lot of things, the Memorandum of Understanding was put in place between the prior superintendent and the prior first selectman, primarily as a hedge for the Board of Education. And that hedge was, and that agreement was, that if the amount, the cost of the insurance, the cost of the liability, the cost of the programs were higher than the Board of Ed had budgeted, the town would actually pick up that expense. That was what the first part of that hedge was. Luckily, that was never the case. So it was essentially a hedging instrument that never got to be used. And I completely understand, from a financial perspective, why the prior superintendent entered into that agreement. Now, we can all get into whether it should have come before the Board of Education. I get that. I leave that to you. That's your responsibility. But as a hedging instrument, when she was entering into a new insurance arrangement, covering 1,500 employees and didn't know what to expect, I completely understand why they entered that agreement. And that's why that original MOU was there. And I understand that, and I respect it. Thank you.
Mr. Fattibene?
Yeah, I guess a point of clarification for myself to, I guess, to the chair. We have this document in front of us, enclosure number 2. And there was an indication that this particular document is not necessarily, or the town does not necessarily agree with this particular document. And there was the possibility of maybe some motion amending this document. I'd just like to indicate that I have not seen that language. And for a document of this importance, I would be reluctant and probably not approve a document until I've seen the language and had some thought on it in the same meeting in which I see that language. So that I just want to indicate that I find it, if that language was known ahead of tonight's meeting, it should have been presented to, I think, the board so they can consider it prior to the meeting. Otherwise, I can't in good faith in it for this document's nature to, no matter what it is, to approve it the first time seeing it in one meeting.
No, that's perfectly fine, and that's certainly within the purview of the board. I knew the information, I just didn't think it was fair for me to change it on my own. That needs to be done at the board table. I had a member advise me that they are interested in doing that. You guys can hear the motion, and you can postpone, you can vote at another meeting. I have no issue with that.
Can I follow up briefly?
Sure.
It was my understanding that this new language is language that would make the agreement agreeable with the town. Is that true or not true? This is if it's language that was proposed by
I
the
think we're
board member.
discussing an issue that hasn't even been put on the table yet. All I'm simply trying to do is relay information to you.
As a clarification, is there language that, right now we have before us a draft document prepared that is proposed to be passed by the Board of Education in that what we agreed to as a document.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding now is from comments made that the town administration, as well as the Board of Finance, may not be in agreement with that document that is before this body right now. So my point is, if they have a counter proposal of language which would make it agreeable to them, then it would expedite the process, and it's senseless for us to vote on a document in which they're not in agreement with.
Right.
So I don't know if they have a proposal at this point. Whether they have a counter
Well,
proposal or
I'll
not.
let the first selectman speak for himself, but the bottom line is they want the dates removed, Mr. Fattibene, and it's the second page of the document. That's all. It's just getting rid of the last page, but I'll let Mr.
But it's coming
Tetreau.
from the Selectman's office, administration.
Correct.
All right.
And we have language, I had a board member offer up that he would offer something this evening. It's
Okay.
not as complicated as it sounds until we actually get it out on the table. And if you want to hold it off, I absolutely have no problem with it. But at some point, from a process standpoint, we have to talk about it. And I didn't want to take the liberty to amend a document myself that the board hadn't spoken about. Mr. Tetreau, would you like to address that?
Yeah, two thoughts. One is that what was presented, I believe, to this board back in September was what was agreed to by the Board of Finance and, or at least proposed by the Board of Finance, proposed by the Selectman.
It was
Right. And forgive me, the time, it might have been August, it might have been September, something like that. Late night last night. So this board chose to make significant changes to that, which is certainly, you're right, it just, those changes didn't really meet the objectives we had when we prepared the original draft. And they weren't acceptable then, they really aren't acceptable now in terms of, we're trying to work this around so that we do not get involved in managing any of the accounts that you have. And I would suggest that we'd like the same consideration on this side, and don't set goals and targets with this, because whatever we agree to, I want to be able to commit to. And I can't commit to when we can address that $7 million deficit in the workers' comp reserve fund.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Tetreau. One thing. Last year, when this became an issue during the budget process, you'll recall that collectively it was asked, and I believe this board even asked, I know my board asked, I know the prior First Selectman and the Board of Selectmen asked that we put together a group to work on this and come to a common understanding across all of the parties. Dr. Title was, I want to thank him publicly very much for taking the lead on that and recognizing that this was an issue and working with us through the summer. This document has not gone before the Board of Finance yet. I have distributed to them. They've seen the various drafts. I have had conversations with board members regarding it, but it has not been voted upon by our board. As the First Selectman indicated, there was a draft that I was agreeable to as the board representative. I think the First Selectman was agreeable to. I won't speak for others, although the working group as a whole thought it was in good enough shape to bring before your body. And I want to be very clear here. We wanted to make sure it went to your body first, and we wanted to make sure that a dialogue like this happened. We wanted to make sure that the communication between the various parties was crystal clear, and so that we could, to the extent possible, address any concerns or objections the town bodies might have. But we started with you, and that was for this specific purpose.
Any more questions? I just want to wrap up questions for the First Selectman and for Mr. Flynn. Mrs. Kennelly.
Mr. Tetreau, you mentioned the managing of the accounts, and I don't know if this is the point that Mr. Fattibene was referencing earlier, and it might speak to Mr. Liu's point as well. Just a simple, again, hopefully a simple question, in that the recommendation is to fund at 125%. We're being asked to fund at 200%. This is just a very simple accounting question, I believe. When, at the end of our budget year, if in fact we have had another good experience and we don't need to tap into that fund at greater than the 125%, my basic question is what happens with the rest of that money? Because we're not using it. We're not withdrawing it. We're not trying to use it to fund something else. What happens when we've funded at 200% and don't need it?
Same as happened this year. I believe you're in fact funding less than what the actuary recommended. Consequently, the net result will be to draw that down from whatever was in excess of the 2 times IBNR at the end of last year down to the IBNR, 2 times the IBNR. So we're just asking that that reserve number stay the same. So you'd be funding your experience level, much like if it was down at 1.25 times the IBNR. At some point, you'd be funding it. Your P&L line would be the same after the drawdown. So your annual expense isn't changing as long as that number stays the same. Does that make sense? I say that.
I guess, I mean, my understanding is that that's to pay claims. I mean, that's the idea that it's hedging the bets against more claims than were anticipated.
Can I take a crack?
Sure.
Because I want to help out if I can. If you look at, I'm referring to the document that the First Selectman passed out earlier, right? And he also quoted me, which was quite nice, where I said, as it relates to these funds, do no harm, right? Mm-hmm. All we're asking for is, you see at the top, it says 3.2 million.
Mm-hmm.
We'd like to see that same number next year.
Okay, but
We'd like it to stay. We'd like you to do no harm to the reserve account.
Plus any additions.
Right? Well, you're going to have expense and you're going to have additions, right? So what we're saying is you're going to have addition and expense, right? Because the funds are going to go in through the budget.
When I say additions, I'm talking about additions in staff. Because that will affect the reserve.
Well, it'll affect the ins and the outs. It'll affect your quote on your operating. It'll reflect, thank you, Mike. It'll reflect what Aon tells you. Okay? So all we're saying is, you see the reserve? We just don't want the reserve in this account to get any worse. See what we mean? That's what we're trying to do. Because if you look at the 3.2 million,
mm-hmm.
and look all the way across, and you see the 7.6 with brackets around it.
Right.
Bad, bad, bad. So we're trying to address the bad, bad, bad while maintaining the good, good, good. So we need help with that. If that gets you there, absolutely. But that's what we're trying to address. And on the bad side, we're both bad, 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 because that's a shared liability on that side.
Right.
Does
So
that help?
I definitely understand the not wanting to drop below the 3.2, but isn't our, unless I'm misreading this, aren't we being asked to budget at 3.7?
But that's whatever your operating in and out is through the year, to keep you at what the, and I don't know that it's 3.7. Dr.
Yeah,
Tata
to
can talk to that.
Mrs. Kennelly's question,
Mr. Carey?
this is an accounting as of the end of last year.
Oh, yeah,
You
that's
have an
that.
accounting that's probably up to October or November.
He's right.
What's
They're
going to
using
happen
June
is you're going to see this number evolve as we go through the town budget process. It'll change each month as we get new experience. So the numbers get better or worse every month. In our good fortune, they've gotten better every month through the last 3 budget seasons. But, so there's going to be a little bit of a delta between what the first selectman has given us in the balance sheet, is it's 9 months removed, or 6 months removed.
Thank you. And to put this into context, I'm sorry, Madam Chairman,
No, go
might I
ahead,
follow
yes,
up?
please.
Just to put it in the context, we do have unaudited numbers through December 31st that the Chief Fiscal Officer just gave us on the account through this year. Okay. Now, this is a snapshot in a period of time, okay? So you have to remember that when you look at this, okay? You started out as of July 1st at 3.1 million. See the 3,119, right? So carry that over and say 3,119. You've had a series of revenues. Those are the employee contributions, the town contributions, right? That number through the last 6 months, through December 31st, has been a negative $748,000, meaning that you're not even this year, through year to date, through December 31st, covering what your expenses. So your funding is actually, the 3.1 I was talking about, and saying we don't want to see that number go down through December 31st, that number's now like 2.4. Okay? So we're like on the razor's edge there.
We need to look at that. That doesn't sound right.
It's what we got from the Chief Fiscal Officer just a couple hours ago.
Yeah, we haven't had a chance to look at that. 'Cause
Yeah. And that's why, by the way, I mean, I'm just trying to put it in the context here. That number, it's a new number. It needs some review. I was trying to put you in the context that all we're asking you to do is fund what we think your expense is going to be on any given year, right? So that you don't negatively impact that fund balance, and that you help us collectively address the issue in the other account, which is still at 7.6 million. Okay. By the way, the town, just on that same, through the 12 months, or through the 6 months, the town side actually is a good guy, no brackets, of 863,000. So we've actually helped on the town side with their medical experience through the first 6 months of this year. That could radically change, but it's just a data point.
However, the workers' comp number is still 7.5 million to the bad.
Right.
Thank you. All right, I just want to note that it's 8:30. We do have a major item on our agenda this evening. If you have a further...
It's pretty simple.
Okay, go ahead, Mrs. Brown.
Actually, you said you agree to the first page, but not the second page, but the sentence continues. I just want to know what part you agree to and what you don't.
Right. And I'm speaking in broad sense, so
Oh, I'm sorry. I actually thought you were actually literal.
no, I'm sorry. I mean,
From a personal standpoint, I was comfortable with everything except for that last sentence on the first page. So the sentence that carries over,
it does.
Where's the time limit?
Which, say again?
The last sentence on the first page where there's where this stops.
the last 2 typed lines on the first page. For you to delete everything after that.
Okay.
Can I get a clarification of that, Macy?
Yes, you may.
You're referring to the last 2 lines of the first page and the first 2 lines of the second page only, or everything after on the
Everything
second
after the last 2 lines.
page? On the first page?
Correct.
Including everything on the second page?
Correct.
Everything?
Yes.
Oh, actually, point of information.
Lines as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Point of information, I actually did ask for legal opinion in writing, and I asked either last Monday or last Tuesday. In fact, there were a whole series of legal questions that I sent in. I did not get a response, nor did the public even have the opportunity to see those questions. So I would have actually felt immensely better had I seen a written legal opinion stating that this wasn't going to violate our statutory obligations as a Board of Ed.
Thank you for raising that as a point of information. I didn't think it was in my purview as the board chair to have one member request an expense of our legal team, and I'm glad we can have that opportunity to speak about it here. What I'd like to suggest is once we've actually agreed to the memorandum, I will collectively ask for the questions that the board is looking for. We can send it all through to the legal in one fell swoop rather than doing it piecemeal and running up a legal bill. That's just a suggestion. I am open to other ideas from the board in that regard.
Can I jump in for a second?
Sure.
I want to, before people get too alarmed about the December 31st numbers, because those are a bit skewed, and I'd want to calm the waters on that before everybody jumps off the deep end.
I was calm.
Okay, because actually our experience through November 30th was excellent. It's hard to believe it fell off that big of a cliff. The way we take our contributions from our employees, because there tend to be, because a lot of them are, school year, they start in September, is we're talking about 4 months worth of employee contributions that have gone into the fund, but there's 6 months worth of claims. And we haven't transferred the grants over. And food service also hasn't made its full contribution. So we need to, what we do is we take the experience report and we run it into another profit and loss statement, which we provide. So I think when those factors are put into the pot, I think we're actually going to find out that we're in pretty good shape.
Good.
I just want to make that brief point. I know it's a bit of a bird walk, but I didn't want people to think that all of a sudden this account's in major trouble.
No, I want to thank you. I think you've uncovered another opportunity for improved communication.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Convertito, and then I'm hoping Mr.
Yeah, I'm
Tetreau,
hoping
Mr.
to,
Flynn can sit
get to
down.
this. I guess my question to, the superintendent, the first selectman, and the chair of the finance board is, if the three of you haven't come to consensus on a document, why do we have it?
It has,
I think we were on consensus on the original version of the document that was submitted to this board last August, and I think it's
Except we-
been radically changed.
This board switched over in November. I've never been given an original version of what the original document was. And now I'm finding myself crossing out what's marked a draft, but I find out that it's our draft and not the mutual draft. And I have no problem with the three of you working out an agreement for us to put before us. And matter of fact, I prefer that.
maybe if you could, I believe Mr. Dwyer just wants to offer up an amendment, and I believe that will satisfy all the parties involved. And if not, this board can hold this over. This is really becoming a case of who came first, the chicken or the egg. Somebody has to start the process. Mr. Fattibene?
Just as a point of clarification, the language that was indicated to be deleted or was the town was not in agreement right now, a substantial portion of that language, was that not in the original draft memorandum?
I don't believe so.
You don't believe so?
Not in terms of what was worked out by the summer study group, if you will.
Well, we can get the draft and find out. But my belief is that a substantial portion of that language was included in the original draft. And having been the one involved in redrafting this document, it was not, there were only a couple of substantial or substantive revisions made. Most of it was clarification of language, including that whole second page. So I don't think the language changed in substance, except for a few minor points.
Mr. Dwyer?
When I was out in the audience, I kept the September draft, and Mr. Fattibene is probably closer, in his opinion, in that there is some language on the back that was in the original draft. Notwithstanding that, I think we're not in September, we're in January, and we have a new board. I will offer an amendment that will just put it on the table, and then if I could, I'd like to speak to that amendment. And I had an amendment that included some language of things to pull out, but I think it is simpler to simply move to amend the draft that is in front of you, labeled enclosure number 2, to have the memorandum of intent stop at the word future health insurance costs, that period that's on the first page, and strike all of the language after that until you get to the signature lines. And I would make that motion.
Is there a second? Is there a second for discussion purposes? Mr. Carey, thank you. Discussion.
It has dragged on for a while. I believe that what this document is a statement of budget principles, or as Mr. Flynn said, the rules of engagement, if you will. The world, the country, this state, thankfully not Fairfield, is over-leveraged. Whether it's a bank or a rating agency, they're expecting stronger balance sheets. It's my opinion that irrespective of whether the town has more or less money in one individual account or not, that the rating agencies are expecting to have a stronger balance sheet for the town, of which the school district is 60% of the budget. We ought to have a document that puts our faith and confidence in the superintendent, in the first selectman, and in the chairman of the finance committee, and our respective boards, to say, let's adopt a document that says, this is a statement of principles that for the next couple of 2 or 3 years, we will budget so that the balance remains at 2 times Aon's recommendation. I think that's a responsible thing to do financially, irrespective of all of the other conversation. This document, simply by stopping it at the place that I've suggested, is a document that I believe the first selectman and the chairman of the finance board is comfortable with. I believe Dr. Title is comfortable with that. And I believe that this board should support those 3 individuals in managing this budget that we so fondly talk about. And so I would hope that that the board would say, it's time to put this to rest, it's time to move on, we have a budgeting principle, and let's act on it. That's it.
Mr. Convertito.
Listen, I have no problem with the memorandum of understanding. I have no problem with that line item in the budget. I intend to vote for that. I have a problem because I'm not comfortable with the fact that what I have here as enclosure number 2 with the amendment is what these 3 town bodies, or representatives of these town bodies, have agreed to. And I'd much rather postpone this, let them get together in the next week, make sure the language is what they want, and come back to us. I don't see how it affects the budget one way or the other. The budget is what it is. They made a request of us. I think we're in at least a majority agreement to honor that request in this budget year and to go forward. But so,
Mr. Dwyer.
I am comfortable with postponing unless the 3 individuals that we're talking about tonight were to say, yeah, I am comfortable with the change that you made, and that works for us. And if it does, it does, and if it doesn't, I think Mr. Convertito is correct. Let's refine it.
Mr. Convertito?
No disrespect to First Selectman and the Chair, but what I would like is a draft to go before the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen and have them say, yes, the draft looks good, okay, because there are other people that are voting on that, and it's not these two gentlemen and Dr. Title can't approve this document without the consensus of those bodies. So I'd like to see if there's a consensus between the 3 bodies on a draft, and if there is, let's move forward. I don't see the problem with that.
Mr. Tetreau, I believe you wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, I would concur. I just want to reemphasize what Mr. Flynn said earlier, is that the 2 of us have commented on this, but it hasn't gone before our respective boards, so that type of process works great. I mean, the goal all along was to make sure it's approved officially by all 3 boards. It's discussed in public at these sessions, so everybody has their input. but it hasn't gone to our board yet because the changes that were made earlier were at least perceived as significant and weren't supported here, so it made sense to come back and talk those out here to make sure we understood what the concerns were and could we come to kind of a mutual consensus, something in the ballpark that might have. So I'd fully support what Mr. Convertito suggested.
Okay.
I would agree.
I am comfortable with that suggestion and could withdraw my amendment, although I do think that we would then be in a position of saying, what is it that we are forwarding to them? The draft enclosure number 2, which has the language, or are we enclosing the suggestion, which would be stopping at the word costs? What is it that we're asking them to react to? Or are we asking them to react to enclosure 2 and come back and tell us what language they would like changed? I think we need to clarify that so that the
Are you asking me to?
somebody.
I think it's a question to the board. Mr. Carey, are you amenable for Mr. Dwyer withdrawing his motion?
Yeah, I am, to Mr. Dwyer's question, I would suggest that we have a sense of the body of what we're going to send over.
Thank you.
Along those lines, I just want to take a moment to thank the First Selectman and the Chairman of the Board of Finance for spending so much time with us this evening on this issue. Having sat through this for the last 3 years in depth, I'm not uncomfortable at this point with the changes that Mr. Dwyer has suggested. And I am very thankful that this document was brought. Usually we don't get to see this until after we've passed our budget. So this is a very informative piece of documentation that I'm very happy to have before we approve our budget this year. What it tells me is that unlike years past, as was pointed out to us by both the officials, the medical reserve on the town is getting better, and significantly better. It was that weighted between $600,000 and $800,000 in deficit year over year since for the first 5 years of this fund. So based on that knowledge and the knowledge that has been provided to us this evening, I would be comfortable with Mr. Dwyer's amendment. I'm also sensitive to the new members wanting to postpone and have some more time to consider this, as well as having a legal look at the further amended document. But I am appreciative of this. I will remind my fellow board members that 80+% of the $24 million we're requesting is funded by the town. So I think we have to be sensitive to that, and you know, consider that situation. The 200% IBNR will take this subject away from the discussion of our education budget moving forward, which has been, to say the least, contentious and distracting from discussing the educational benefits of our budget in past years. And I think by being able to move this subject aside in a manner that will also protect us from additional risk in case our experience goes bad. I think some board members might recall last meeting I indicated that we can pick up $1 to $1.5 million over a 6-month period in terms of experience. We could lose that much just that quickly. So I'm not uncomfortable with 200% of IBNR as a stance is to take as a regular basis. The fact that the town's asking us to do this I don't think is extraordinary, and I would support having that posture until such time as this problem is resolved for the town.
All right, so just so we can start to wrap this up, what I'm hearing from the board is that you would like the superintendent to work with the first selectman and the Board of Finance chairman to, off of this document, to bring something then to the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, for them to review, and then come back to the Board of Education. Did I understand that directive clearly?
There's a motion on the table.
No. They withdrew the amendment to the motion.
There's a main motion on the table, right? There's a main motion to approve, right?
Right, but I'm just at,
What's the motion?
But this is an ancillary discussion, right?
To approve
If I could make a motion to postpone?
is there a second? Mrs. Brand, second. Is there discussion on the postponement? Oh, I'm sorry, thank you.
Actually, Mr. Convertito, since you made the motion, do you want to speak first? My only concern is actually on page 2, and this is where my primary concern has been all along. It says, nothing in this memorandum of intent, and quite frankly, the language is different here. It says intent. as opposed to an understanding, and I don't know why, of an intent on health insurance is intended in any regard to waive, limit, or compromise the Board of Education's statutory rights and independence in creating and implementing its budget
Madam Chair, there's a motion to postpone on the table. This is not relevant to the motion to postpone.
It actually is, because if we're going to postpone, I specifically want a legal validation whether or not this is actually we are in compliance.
Then what you want as a condition of the motion to postpone
Right.
is a legal evaluation. So
Right.
you want me to amend my motion, and I won't take a friendly amendment. The motion is to postpone.
Any discussion, further discussion? Is there any comment from the public on the motion to postpone this item? Nope. All right. All in favor of postponing? I'm sorry? It has to be to the next meeting. It's through default. It passes. I would just like to personally thank the First Selectman and the Chairman of the Board of Finance for coming here this evening and walking us through all of this. I think it's very important that we keep our lines of communications open, and I do appreciate you being here. This is very helpful.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate your time and attention, and we look forward to working with you, and especially the new members. So.
Thank you for the opportunity. We look forward to the next time.
Thank you.
It's not 12:30.
Madam Chair, point of order.
Sure.
I want this to go quick. If it goes quick, if not, that's fine. I'd like to get a sense of the body while the First Selectman and the Chair of the Finance Committee are still here, that this board looks at enclosure number 2, less the strikeouts that were mentioned earlier, as an approvable draft. Just a sense of the body.
I don't know that we can do that. We've moved off of this topic. We're on to the next item. All right. Point B, adoption of the recommended budget for the 2012-2013 fiscal year. Recommended motion that the budget recommendation in the amount of, someone give me a dollar amount,
$149,464,941.
be approved and forwarded to the Board of Finance for its consideration in the preparation of the town budget for the 2012-2013 fiscal year. Further, that the superintendent be authorized to distribute the said amount in a manner agreed to by the board at this meeting. Moved by Mrs. Gerber, seconded by Mr. Dwyer. Discussion. Mrs. Brandt.
I'd like to amend the motion to deduct $123,420
I lost my pen.
from clerical, elementary clerical, to fund the world language grade 6 and use remaining funds for clerical at the superintendent's discretion.
Point of order, Madam Chair, can we get page, line item, code,
Oh.
object?
Well,
Or what we're
actually,
taking out?
the clerical is actually on all of the elementaries. It's the 11,220 per elementary. I can pull one of the first pages for you if you like. And the amount of world language I used as a reference what we had last year, but I'm not sure it's exactly that same cost because it's now another year past. And that was $94,227. And where you will find the clericals listed, I believe, is one of them is, for instance, on pages 56 in your budget book. It starts, I believe, on page 53, 54, 55, 57. I'm not being specific because doing this, you can't get an even number for a trade. It just is impossible.
Okay, is there a second to the motion? Mr. Liu, discussion. No discussion? Mr. Liu?
I really think this is a good idea. I know we are in tough economic times and everything is being cut. And I understand sometimes the clericals helping at time after school is important, but I think it's even more important that we get back some of the things that we've cut. I think world language is vitally important, and I'd rather see that going directly to education than to after-school clericals, so I'm going to support this.
Any further discussion? Mr. Convertito? Sorry, I'm cold.
I was originally inclined to support this amendment, but after doing a little bit more research and looking at, and receiving several emails on the issue, with the cut in paraprofessionals that is proposed in this budget at the elementary school level, and while I fully understand that they're supposed to be doing other things, I can assure you that when they are not with a student, they're in the office answering a phone or doing clerical work and so forth. And for that, personally, I'm grateful because I've seen it and I've experienced it. My fear is that without that paraprofessional support, that there's a workload there that just simply will not and cannot be addressed. And so for that reason, I can't support this motion as much as the cutting of world language was a major motivation of my actions in the last year. On the advice of Dr. Title, given that we haven't seen what the effect of that cut is yet, I'm willing to wait the year to see what that is to move forward on that issue.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Mr. Carey?
Couple quick questions to the chair, Mrs. Brand. Are we talking about just 6th grade, not 4th and 5th grade here?
There isn't sufficient funds. The 4th and 5th grade was $279,000 as of last year. So what I did was quite frankly look at something that would actually make a dent. Okay. And please, I actually feel what Mr. Convertito said is significant, and it wasn't. We're splitting hairs, but I think our primary responsibility has been education. It was a top priority of mine, and I'm consistent. So with that, I do want to see us focus on that. I think it's important.
And my second question to the chair, to Dr. Title or his team. I recall we reduced time at the elementary level from, I believe, 50 to 25. Was it a similar scenario in 6th grade?
Yes, it was reduced.
Can you enlighten us in terms of what we're filling that time with now? Is that consistent across the 3 middle schools? Are we doing more language arts or more
Right,
math?
it adds to language arts time.
Okay. So essentially we're getting an additional 25 minutes of language arts
That's correct.
at the middle school level?
In grade 6.
Okay. Two concerns I have with this. One is that I heard principals from elementary schools indicate they have a safety and security issue. As a parent of some students at one of the larger elementary schools, I've seen that the 2 clerical staff sometimes is not sufficient. I know the PTA had to put on additional, basically a high school student to help traffic the after-school activity program because the 2 staff weren't enough. So I do believe that that's a valid request, and we do have to put safety first despite our desire to continue to broaden our program and restore some of the things we've lost. Secondly, I would like to see what the additional time that we're getting in language arts buys us. That would be of interest to me in terms of scaling that and looking at CMTs and CAP scoring down the road, because if we're getting that extra time, that there could be some benefit there that is residual that we're picking up. So I would be not inclined to support this at this time.
Mrs. Brand.
Yeah, I can offer the answer to that. Spanish will be offered Monday, Wednesday, and Friday versus every day. So what you'll have in grade 6, it will be offered every day. I also do feel when children learn foreign language, in fact, it's not feel, I know, they learn a lot about English as well as their own language. And in this world that we're sending our children out to, I do think it's important. So again, you know, it's up for a vote. It's going to go up or down, but I still felt it was a priority.
Okay. Public comment on this item and this item only.
Hi, Meredith McCormick, Fairfield Beach Road. I'm a budget rep for Sherman Elementary School, and I am asking for you to support this additional clerical help that Dr. Title has asked for. At Sherman, we have fought very hard to open up our office and get a glass wall so people in the office can see who's coming and going in and out of the school. So that's underway. We'll finally have that, but we need someone sitting in the chair watching to see who's coming in and coming out. In the afternoon at Sherman, more than one time a week, a student gets brought back to school on a bus. Someone needs to be in the office to help that student who probably is in a little bit of distress when they realize that no one's at their house to get them off the bus. We run after-school programs at Sherman. There can easily be mix-ups as to who is picking up the child that day. The student needs to go to the office and call home and have someone come get them. Perhaps their parent has already called, but there may be no one in the office to answer the phone. Elementary schools are unique. We're dealing with a population of students who are still just learning their home phone number. We have emergency plans and emergency cards, but we need someone in the office to help facilitate that. Beyond safety, which is a big one, the clerical support is needed. There are a number of tasks that are still manual. Permanent cards have to be updated with assessment scores. Parents request copies of school records. Legal paperwork has to be filed, mail sorted. Supplies ordered, scheduled meetings, kindergarten registration, the list goes on and on. The clerical help is needed, and the safety and security. It's only going to help with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Suzanne Miska, 123 Rygate Road. At the elementary school level, Riverfield School has after-school activities. As a parent, I was one of the volunteers. We take our cell phones, we bring our list of parent contacts, and we're there until that last child is picked up. I think it's lovely that we want to add the extra attention on the clerical side to the elementary schools. And I have no problem if you want to do it at Band 3 schools where you have overcrowding. To look at Band 1 and 2 schools I don't think is very fair when you've got overcrowding at Roger Ludlow and you've already cut their secretarial, their library support. These are students, you've got 1,600 students. Students are going to need transcripts and a level that you've cut them already to the bone. And I've heard that we have to ask the high school students to adapt, and maybe the elementary school students and their parents are going to have to adapt as well. World language is still a criteria and a requirement to graduate high school. The earlier we get these kids learning these extra languages, the better off we're going to be. And I'm sorry that there are invitations and things need to be sent at the elementary school level, but I'd rather see world language, or if you need to fund, you know, that do the Band 3 where you've got overcrowding. But an elementary school with 200 kids, I'd rather see the extra secretarial support at the library level at the high school where you're already concerned about the overcrowding situation. And I'd like to see the world language brought back that we had to vote on a referendum for.
Back to the board. Mr. Fattibene?
Can I have the motion read back?
Yes, the motion is to deduct $123,420 from elementary clerical to fund world language grade 6 and use remaining funds for clerical help at the superintendent's discretion.
Mrs. Brandt?
I may, there were actually, if my math is correct, that leaves actually $29,930. So there is actually funds left over for at least 2 clerical for the schools.
I'm not sure that's true, but because I haven't run all the math on it because this is the first I've heard of this, but adding this back in, we have to add the salaries and the benefits in for the people. And believe the deduct is $112,200 on it, but I'm not sure. I don't think we should count on a balance being there of funding something specifically. I think that there may be a balance there, I think it may be minimal, so it may be closer to even than we think, but without a chance to really run it in some detail. So I don't want to have people think that if they're voting in favor of this, we'll still be able to hire a couple clerical, because I'm not sure that's true, just to be perfectly fair about it.
I agree, because the numbers I was using were from last year. It did include a bus adjustment with the benefits, but again, that's last year's number, and that's all I had to work from.
Is the board prepared for vote? All in favor? Mrs. Kennelly, Mr. Liu, Mr. Fattibene, and Mrs. Brand. Opposed? Mr. Convertito, Mrs. Gerber, Ms. Iacono, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Carey. Motion fails. 5 to 4. Next, any further discussion on the budget? Great. Before we prepare to, no, all right. Before we prepare to vote on the main motion, I will take public comment. We're on public comment. Anyone wish to speak to the board before we vote on the budget? Okay, thank you. We are back to the main motion. Seeing no public comment, all in favor? Oh, I'm sorry.
Suzanne Miska, 123 Rygate Road. In regards to the budget, I have to say I am a little disappointed in the budget. I'm disappointed that things that were removed that caused the town to go to referendum were not put back in. I'm concerned that this budget fields to two sides of the spectrum, the special ed, and special needs, and the gifted program. And I'm concerned that the rest of the population of the student body is really not getting what they need out of our budget. I feel like we've slanted our budget so much to make this responsive to the other boards in our town that these kids are not getting maybe what they need. I am disappointed. I'm disappointed in the process that this took place with. I'm disappointed that this is the first time in 3 budget sessions of the Board of Ed that there's been a public comment. I'm disappointed that the question and answers that were released between the board, you had to go find on the website and was not in the back of the room on the 19th. We did not have copies of the Aon documents on the 19th. You had to go online to get them. I don't understand, because I thought that this was a collaboration between the Board of Ed, the parents, the taxpayers, and the superintendent's office. And I feel like there's been a wall placed here between the taxpayers and the parents and the Board of Ed and the superintendent. I'm very disappointed with this. I really thought we were going to get at least what we lost and a little bit more. I understand the town's in a crisis, but the town brought itself to a crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, all in favor of the motion? Signify by saying aye. Unanimous. The budget passes. We'll move on. Thank you. We will now move on to the next item, which is approval of capital improvement projects for the 2012-2013 year. Yes. I would just want to take a motion. Hold on. If you could just please be quiet when you exit the room, we're still working. The recommended motion that the Board of Education approve the proposed capital improvement projects for 2012-2013 in the amount of $2 million. Moved by Mr. Carey, seconded by Mrs. Kennelly. I just want to point out in front of you, there is a diagram, Dr. Title, rather, pardon me. Would you like to just explain that?
At the last meeting, there was a request under the Tomlinson project to provide a schematic of the proposal because the photographs didn't articulate exactly what would happen there. So Mr. Cullen has provided that. And if this project is approved and goes forward, we'll enclose this in the budget, this document, so that everybody can see it, and we'll attempt to put this on the website if the board endorses the project. I'll do my best to walk through it quickly, and then if you have any more technical questions, I'm going to rely on the experts out there But the big change is in the front of the school on Umpqua Road, where there would be a pick-up and drop-off lane run through there, which would then feed out into what's School Street, which will exit people. That will get the traffic off of Umpqua Road, which is currently, it's a no parking, no standing area, but quite frankly, it's widely ignored because it's the most convenient place to drop off. And so this would take that traffic off the road and would also be a place for, when it's not pick up and drop off time, that's a possible place for delivery trucks and so forth. There is a additional signage that's listed on here, and a reworking of the handicap parking spaces. There's the bus queue is shown that it's possible in the afternoon to do some separating of the cars for pickup in the lower level. That we would do some expansion and markings in the lower level to have some dismissal for families down there, which would further separate the traffic on the pickup. That wouldn't really be feasible in the morning because to get into that lower circle, it requires that you enter from the south, which requires you to go through the parking lot, which in the morning is an impossibility, which was, somebody asked that, I think, Mr. Dwyer last time. So that would still be available as an option to help with dismissal, but it would not help with drop-off. So I just wanted to point that out, what the general plan is here, and that it was brought to the police commission, reviewed by the traffic engineer of the town, reviewed by Mike Galante, our traffic consultant, reviewed by the police chief, and people that work for the police chief. I should say Lieutenant Perez in particular was very helpful with this, because the police are concerned as well with ongoing violations of traffic regulations that, quite frankly, are very difficult to enforce. I'll stop there.
Any further discussion on this? Mr. Fattibene.
On this drawing, it says on the left-hand side about center or midway. On the drawing in the left-hand side, in the middle, it says consider a drop-off / pickup lane, parentheses, 2 concepts. What does that mean? Could you explain that a little?
Tom, can you explain that? I see there's a blue dashed line, and then there's the 2 solid lines in there. So.
Yes, when the consultant and the traffic engineer from the town originally looked at this, there were 2 ideas for the front of the school. One was just to remove the sidewalk and curb and move it in like 5 or 6 feet and just have like an extension to Umpqua Road so people could pull over and get out of the way a little bit. And then the other option was to actually do a road that comes onto the grass. And when we looked at the costing of both of those, there are 3 major telephone poles along that sidewalk that have heavy utilities on them. They're, number one, extremely expensive and difficult to move and relocate, and scheduling them would be a nightmare. So the police commission opted for the actual road that comes in onto the grass and gets it totally off of Umpqua Road, and it's separated. It also makes it so that we can have anywhere from 8 to 12 assigned parking spaces when that road isn't used for drop-off or pickup. So people can stop there, run into the school, do their business, come out. FedEx trucks, UPS trucks, all that can use that road. So that's why the note says there's 2 concepts.
Right. Is that road depicted on this drawing?
Yes.
And where would that be?
The road, the concept that the police commission approved, the double red line is the actual sidewalk.
Right.
That gets moved. Where the red arrows are is the driveway and the road. So that's the option they went with.
Right. Would in the red hatched mark with the white sidewalk that's existing, in that plan, would that stay and be a separation between Umpqua Road and the new proposed road in front of Tomlinson?
No.
So it would be blacktop pavement from Umpqua Road all the way to the proposed red extended sidewalk? Is that
No,
right?
the sidewalk stays there. It makes like an island. The utility poles stay. They're showing hatching there, so that's a no standing zone.
So that would stay?
Yeah.
You know, the hatching stays, but the intent of the pull-off of Umpqua Road doesn't.
So the existing sidewalk would stay?
Correct.
Do we know do we know how many feet that new proposed roadway would extend from the existing sidewalk into closer to Tomlinson?
Yes, we do, and we actually had the consultant go out and meet with the principal and mark it off so they had an idea of how close it would get to the existing benches that are there, the lights and the steps that go up. It's probably not identified here to give you feet and footage, but we wanted to know how much of the grass front area was going to be disturbed. For those of you that know Tomlinson, there's 2 benches in front of there. They're offset. The first bench has to get moved up across from the other bench, and the new road and curb put in. And I believe there's 4 or 5 trees that have to get relocated.
And that's not depicted on this drawing that
No.
well? So we don't know if, and you're saying, is there money in the in the proposed budget to put into place that proposed new road in front of the
Yes.
Tomlinson? Do you have an idea as to what, as of the overall, of the total allocated amount of, I think, $150,000? Is that right? How much of that is that?
What's more than
Is
that?
that what you're looking for?
Yep.
That's just the plan. That's just the study, though. Well, it's the traffic project. Do we know how much of that $150,000 that is in the capital plan budget is going to be allocated to that concept of including a road in front of Tomlinson?
I don't believe we do in the breakdown. Can I borrow yours?
Yeah.
In the breakdown in the back. Page 43. It really just breaks out the consultant to do better drawings and specifications so we can pull a permit. And then the licensed contractor piece is bid out, but it gives you the detail we got from Mr. Hurley, from the town, and from Michael Galante of Frederick P. Clark. And then we put a contingency in there.
But it doesn't break out
It
the
doesn't
difference,
break out
how
all
much,
the options.
Right, well, it
Yeah.
doesn't break out, for example, how much is the lower parking lot versus how much is the front lawn work?
Yeah, how much
That
are
may
the
be what your question
signs,
is.
how much are the
Right, there's
paintings on the
signage, I
road?
mean, there's, right.
No.
Yeah. My concern is that whether you can achieve that road without more substantial cost. But my understanding, the reason the road is being moved inward closer to the building is to avoid having to move utility poles.
Not really. The utility poles being moved would only be part of the option that was coming off of Umpqua and just pulling in like 5 feet to kind of get out of the way of the traffic.
Right.
And making it like a standing zone.
Right.
That didn't make sense based on the detail the consultants gave and the police department gave when they went out there and saw all of the work that had to be done with that sidewalk and curb and the 3 poles, all the transformers, all of that work. And they would prefer we get the traffic off of Umpqua and do the roadway coming onto the front of Tomlinson because it does a number of things. It gets people going in the right direction to drop children off and then follow that one-way road around Tomlinson. It gives us parking spaces and drop-off zone, pickup zone, and all of the things I've been saying.
All right, thank you.
Mrs. Brand?
Does the estimate cover the trees, all the landscaping that you're going to have to do as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything else on either the Tomlinson or the rest of the capital improvement projects? Seeing none, public comment? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I would just like to thank the board members individually and collectively for your support of the budget and your thorough consideration and understanding of the difficult choices we had to make in bringing it to you. We appreciate it, and I look forward to working as a team with all 9 of you and myself and my staff to do the best we possibly can as a team to advance us through the town bodies, so we can achieve everything that's in here. I think that's the next step, and this is transferring now from not just the superintendent's budget to now being our budget, both budgets. And I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to work with all of you in future meetings, of which there are many, to explain this budget and the rationale for it to the town bodies so that we can bring this, both these budgets forward to successful conclusion. So I just want to thank you for that, and I look forward to many further nights on this issue.
Thank you. We're going to move to public comment, and on that note, it is our budget now. This is now the Board of Education budget. Public comments and petitions. Rules are written on the agenda. Does anyone like to speak? Any open board comment? Mrs. Brand.
We have a policy on the budget in our policy book. And the first sentence, it's budget. It's listed under business and non-instructional operations. And the number is 3100. And the first sentence, it says, the annual budget preparation process shall include broad-based participation, careful scrutiny of programs, and expenditures to help the board fulfill its responsibilities to the students, staff, and town. The superintendent, it lists several particulars. It also says the board shall review projected costs, finalize requirements, establish a desirable budget amount, and specify parameters for the superintendent to use in the development of a proposed budget. I actually think this should be more of a collaborative process. I think we need to start this earlier. I think what ends up happening when we proceed this way is that, quite honestly, the budget's a surprise. We're not involved in the development of it at all. I don't necessarily know where we're going with this, and I think that we want to include the public. I think the first selectman recently said that he'll be involving the public in the development of the town budget, and I applaud him for it. I think the school district should do no less. Further, I think this is what I believe is part of what our job is relative to our policy. I don't think we follow the policy. I also think if at least it would alleviate some of the discourse at the 11th hour, because I think people would have a great appreciation of why things are happening. Because the way it is right now, honestly, with the budget proposal from the superintendent, it's like Hobson's choice.
Anybody else have any open comment? Mr. Liu.
Yeah, I agree, and I would go a step further, saying that we should, through policy, build into our calendar meeting dates that are specific to the goals and to the goals of what we want the budget to be, so that in October and November we can be discussing this at the board table, presenting ideas. And I am disappointed in our leadership for not bringing that to us and getting that as part of our regular season.
Anybody else for open board comment? Okay, motion to adjourn. Moved by Mr. Carey, second by Mrs. Brand. All in favor? Unanimous. Well, meeting is adjourned.
There's something about this that feels thoroughly unsatisfying. I just don't feel like I've done my job. I really don't. No, I agree. I mean, I was taking a look at the Greenwich website for how they do their budget, and it's a 2-month process with the board.